All right, guys. So today we're here with Lorraine Sharpe, who does camps where she trains horses and sometimes people also. Is that is that fair to say, Lorraine?
That's kind of accurate. And also, interestingly, my surname is actually Barnfield, which is very appropriate considering all I do is mess around with horses.
Was
And
it Barnfield?
Barnfield, yeah.
All
and,
right.
uh, and my maiden name is Sharp. But yeah, I've because I've chosen to remove myself from my family, I am refusing also to go back to my maiden name. So, so there you go.
That's an interesting subject already.
Mm.
That's we could definitely go into that.
So I have very I mean I don't this isn't like a hard and fast rule, but I very often when I'm talking to conscious people, there is often some part of the family they're not talking to. That's that's the thing that I seem to experience a lot.
So I think that's possibly something to do with what we were talking about earlier. Is about choice. It's about who you choose to be, and I find that quite often somebody else has made a choice for us in childhood, and therefore you get to a point where you grow away from those people, or you don't want to be like them, or you feel the need to change for yourself to be able to pursue what it is that you want to pursue. So I think that's why people walk away and grow up. And I don't know how what you guys believe, but I believe that we choose our parents before we're born, and we choose the people who are going to help us become who we are meant to be in this life. And yeah, I can fully understand why I chose my parents and now choose to walk away from them. But it served me well.
Can I ask you then, Lorraine, if you say you believe in that we choose our parents before we're born, how does that coincide with walking away from them?
That's a good
So,
question.
so because I think that, so for me, I had to be treated in a certain way that would help me to help horses and help other people in order for me to grow and become who I am. And and as I have become who I am, I've discovered that actually what my parents continued to do was too damaging. It was too harsh for me
Yeah.
to carry on the work that I am doing. I mean, I suppose it's about judgment. It's about non-acceptance. It's about them seeing me for the 5-year-old child that they still think I am.
Oh yeah.
Refusing to let me grow up. Um, and and all, I suppose the interesting thing is as well. Um, so I have had a lot of counselling throughout my life, and the very first counselling session I had, um, she said to me, "You've spent so much time trying not to become your parents. You have no idea who you are." And that was when things started to change. I had to go for counselling because I had a daughter and I didn't know how to be a parent because I did not want to be the parent that my parents had been to me. And it started me on a whole journey of understanding that, well, it's never stopped, to be honest. It's the same today as it was back then. I'm just forever discovering who this person is that I'm becoming because of that life I had when I was a child. So
Yeah, and I want to say that there's, in my opinion, the greatest gift you can give to the world is to take all that trauma that the generational trauma from your family, take all that and then work on ending it with you and not reproducing it on your own children. Because what the what scientists are saying now is that the trauma is even in our genes. So that means that we're looking at humans have been around for a while now. We're looking at potentially hundreds of thousands of traumatic memory that just keeps being shifted to the next generation, both through behavior, but also they say through genetics. So to me, it's the most praiseworthy thing you can do is to be like, I'm going to try and make this stop with me, because the thing about trauma is it accumulates almost always, so it gets worse. And that's also why I think we have so much pain and dissatisfaction in the world today, because people, they grow up with such a huge burden of trauma right off the bat, stuff that it didn't even come from their lives.
And I suppose that is the point of, that is why parents parent the way they do, because of what happened to them. I mean, I know that my father had a horrendously traumatic childhood. A couple of head injuries caused by violence or an accident. How these things are going to affect you, aren't they? It's not about making excuses as to why people behave a certain way. I think that you either come to a conclusion that you cannot carry on like this, or you live in a kind of blissful ignorance that suits you, and if that's, I mean, it's really interesting actually, because my sister and I had a conversation. Oh, we just lost connection there. So my sister and I had a conversation about if one of our children decided to not speak to us, how we would go out of our way to make it okay. And neither of my parents have done that. I mean, the most I've had is a couple of emails, and the final straw came through COVID, when the pair of them were trying to blackmail me into having my vaccination. And again, I don't know how you guys feel about this, but I am completely anti-vaccination. I think the whole COVID thing was an experiment, and we were the rat labs. Sorry, even the lab rats who were involved in that. I suppose in order for me to be me, I needed to get their voices out of my head all the time. And it was very, very hard while they were in my life. And before all this happened, I'd been coming to that conclusion. I needed to walk away. And then my father sent me an email saying, when, not if, but when you die from COVID, I hope you are not going to leave the mess behind, as I know you will, for your daughter to sort out. And if you do, I will be down to slaughter all of your horses and your dogs.
Jesus fucking Christ.
And I must have read that email 7 or 8 times, because it breaks my heart to say this. I love my dad, I really do. But for him to say that to me shows he doesn't understand me. He doesn't understand my daughter. My daughter would be devastated. Our animals, I mean, she doesn't live with me anymore. She's 25, sorry. But if that happened to her, she would be, it would be bad enough she lost me, never mind losing all our animals as well. And she's more than capable of picking up whatever mess it is that I'm going to leave behind. So it just shows a complete lack of understanding of both of us. And I just wrote back to him and I said, you need to forget you ever had a second daughter, because I cannot deal with that. And I would not I would not choose to have a friend in my life who spoke to me like that and who thought so badly of me. So why would I choose to have a family member in my life who did the same?
Right.
And I think that's, this is one of the weird things about every time I talk to you, Toby, and stuff comes out of my mouth that I never expect to. We end up talking about things that I just think, whoa, that wasn't on the agenda when I was thinking about this conversation. But I think this is the point, isn't it? Is that, it's having conversations with people who they look much more deeply into things. that brings out this passion. It brings out this consciousness, I guess, of, we're not just going to accept things the way they are. We're just not, because it doesn't have to be like that. And again, this goes back to, we have a choice in life. Every single moment of every single day, we are making choices.
Right.
And I think that, you can choose to be abused or bullied or whatever you want to call it by people, or you can choose to find a better way. And believe me, I have tried and tried and tried to communicate with my parents in such a way that, we could heal some of this stuff.
Yeah.
But there comes a time when you just go, well, I'm sorry, but relationships are 100% each person's responsibility. And if they're not prepared to take it, why am I breaking my neck trying to get them to take some responsibility for their relationship with me? And it's my parents are constantly surprised by everything that I do. It's like they go, "Oh my god, I'm so surprised that you managed to do that. Why? Is that because I'm still 5 years old? Oh yes, that'll be why then." so,
Yeah.
so yeah, so I think that's what it's about. It's about, I made my choices, which neither of them approve of in any way, shape, or form, I'm sure. But I'm happy, and I don't think either of them are. And I choose happiness over most things, if I'm honest. I choose it over money. I choose it over, in the nicest possible way, hurting people's feelings, because, if to be happy, I can't be around certain people, then I have to make that choice for myself. It's taken quite a lot to survive this world, and now that I am doing, I know why I am doing, and I know what led me there. So why would I choose to go back?
Yeah, and I'm really happy you bring this up, because a lot of conscious people, pretty much everyone I've talked to, has the issue that there are people in their family that are expressing disapproval, or you even have things that are downright abuse. And so when you talk about this is important, because a lot of our listeners are gonna, either they have experienced this, or they're experiencing right now. And a lot of them are also unfortunately going to allow it to happen, because they still, like, I know with my mother, I looked for her approval many years after I should have known that it isn't that she didn't want to give it, she didn't have it.
Mm-hmm.
It was never, she didn't have it to give. She never, I thought she was withholding something from me, but she didn't have it. So why was I waiting for it? But I was just hoping for it. And I think another thing is that if anyone was put into a room of 30 random people, they wouldn't expect to get along with all of them and just think it was a big happy family. And the thing about family is that family is just 20 or 30 random people. And there's no guarantee that these have the same values, that they're on the same vibration. There's no guarantee at all that your family is somehow well fit to be the people you want in your life. If you have some of your family that is like that, that's a wonderful stroke of luck. But they're just random people bound together by genetics. And so we kind of have to understand, like you said, that it's really important who we allow into our lives. And it's such, what you said was one of the things that really made me distance myself from some people in my family. And that was like, I asked myself, if this person was not my family member, would I want them in my life? And I was like, hell no, I wouldn't let this person anywhere near me.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was like, then why am I spending time with this person? If their energy gets me down, if I don't like their values, if everything about them is just a negative influence in my life, right?
Mm.
And I think it's such an important subject for conscious people, because I've never met a conscious person who hadn't experienced this to some degree. And a lot of them is like, a lot of the ones I'm talking to now, not talking to their parents, or they're trying to keep the peace, or they're keeping a distance. They're trying to, in some way, to deal with the fact that their parents are unconscious. They're very conservative in their views, not necessarily in a political way. They're just they're just not willing to change their views or update them or new information or anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is it's a huge subject, and it really is like, and there's a, and I think everyone, I think Jonathan, we talked about this as well. And I think Jonathan is more lenient. He's more willing to give people more chances and all this stuff. And I think that kind of shows that we all deal with it differently, but I think we all have to, no matter what our temperament is, we have to make some boundaries around the people that drain us. Jonathan, maybe you can talk a little bit about your view on it, because I think you're a little bit more willing to give people a chance, right?
Yeah.
When it comes to like family.
Well, you know what? I personally, I would like to also ask you some questions, Lorraine. I'll just briefly talk about me for a second. Yes, my view on this is that I also believe that we're born into, like, before we are born, like our family or our parents, you could say, people were, yeah, who will be our parents, are chosen at that point in time. Everyone's got a different belief around that, and that's very okay as well.
Is that your belief?
That is my belief. Yeah, yeah. Um, and saying that, I also see that in my life as well, it hasn't always been easy with the parents that I have, and it's been challenging, and there's been um, a lot of joy and a lot of pain, and I'm ultimately I'm at the point of, like, it's about somewhat of acceptance, and for me, acceptance is different to tolerance. So it's like, you don't like tolerate, like, people often confuse the two with, tolerating somebody's actions or whatever, um, or tolerating that they treat you in a certain way, and that's not at all what I mean. What I mean by what I mean by acceptance is, like, accepting that, like, that is a part of your past, that is a part of what has happened to you, or the trauma, for example, or the you can't change the way people have treated you, but you can give space and make room for accepting that that's happened, and then choose, like, in this moment now, to act in the way that you choose to. And I think you touched on that beautifully, Lorraine, with, like, something changed in you to wake up to, like, okay, now something needs to change, and I don't even know who I am, because I've just been running away from my parents or their actions or the way they behave. But I don't know truly who I am and how I want to show up for my child as a mum. And so I'm actually really curious to know from you, Lorraine, what did you do to kind of go into yourself in that way, to explore yourself and your conscious choices, and to kind of start that path, you can say?
So the first thing that happened was I became a mother, and a single mother at that, which was also a conscious decision. But actually, I was working in a school, and I had a horse and a house to run, and was constantly broke. I was doing 60 odd hours a week and still trying to look after everything else. And one day I found myself standing at the side of a road, waiting for this massive bus to reach some speed, shall we say, so I could walk out in front of it. And the most shocking thing to me was my daughter was 4 years old at the time. No, she wasn't. That's a lie. She was 6 years old at the time. And I didn't think about her once. I didn't think about my horse. I didn't think about family, the dogs, and these things are my life, and they never, ever entered my head. I was so fixated on, I just want to die right now. I cannot do anything else. And then as I started to run towards this bus, one of the lads that I used to teach at school was standing on the other side of the road. And he went, "You all right, miss?" And I thought, oh my God, I can't do that in front of him. That was the only thing that stopped me. And it's probably the reason that I'm not seriously injured, dead, whatever, now. And I think one of the most profound things about that was he was called Justin, so he was just in time.
Just in time.
And it was like and when I got to the other side of the road, he said to me, he says, "Miss, are you all right?" He's like, "You're shaking and you're a really funny colour." And I just remember thinking, walk away, pull yourself together, do not talk to this lad because you could scar him for life with what is going on in your head. And it was then I think prior to that I'd started to have counselling because I didn't know how to be a parent. That was definitely when my daughter was 4, because I was 32 at the time. But I guess a lot of it was to do with I was completely off the rails when I was a kid,
Yeah.
and all I wanted was a horse. I was introduced to horses when I was 3 or 4, and started riding when I was 6, and then was always told I could never have a horse because the first thing that would go if we were broke, and we were destined to be broke forever, according to my mother, which is another thing that is instilled in my brain.
Right.
Then so I wasn't allowed to have one until I could afford to buy one for myself. And then I bought, which if you know anything about horses is a ridiculous thing to do, an ex-racehorse as my first horse. Now I've been riding for, I don't know, I was 17 at the time, so I've been riding for a lot of my life, and I thought I knew it all because I was 17. And bought this horse and realised I knew absolutely nothing. And then when I was 19, she kicked me in the face and nearly killed me. And she kicked me here, but also here. I've got a tiny little scar there. And the doctor said to me, because I was paralysed for 5 days and they didn't know whether that was, they thought it was just swelling to the spinal cord, which fortunately it was. But of course, 19 years old, can't move anything, can barely talk, move your face. I could move my head, and that was it. And I could sit up or be sat up and stay there. And then the doctor said to me, whatever it was you were going to do with your life, get on and do it because you nearly didn't have one. Now, at the time, I was wild. Probably had 3 or 4 men on the go at a time, drinking all the time. I used to go to school drunk, when I was a kid. I was just completely off the rails. I never did drugs because it just wasn't of any interest to me. My sister did, but, it just... I'm a control freak as well, or I was, and I was like, "There's not a chance I'm taking drugs because I'll be completely out of control." Yet, funnily enough, I was probably never in control when I was drunk either. But those two things didn't go together. The being drunk meant that I couldn't really feel anything, couldn't think about anything. Was very much bordering on the, being an addict. I used to have a gambling addiction as well, and it was just I was just so off the rails, it was ridiculous. And yet managed to buy my first house when I was 23, I think. Started running my own business when I was 19. Second house when I was 26, I think. I could do all this stuff, and I could kind of operate. But being kicked in the face made me realise that we have no idea what we're doing with horses. And that actually I brought that on myself, and everybody was like, shoot the horse, blame the horse, Fortunately, my father had moved to Spain by then, otherwise he would have shot the horse, I can assure you. So, but all I could see was this poor horse who was, she was going off ahead. Is the only way I can describe it, because she was traumatized by the way I was looking after her, and all I was doing what I'd been taught. I didn't know anything else. I was a bit of a sponge for learning, and if somebody said do this, I'd be like, yeah, okay, that must be the right thing to do, and do it. And I never questioned anything. Did not question anything when I was a kid, which shocks me now considering who I've become. And it started me on this journey of, I need to understand this horse, because I can't sell her, because something will happen to her, she'll die, and it's my responsibility. This horse, I don't know, this might not mean anything to you guys, but she was sold to me as a 7-year-old, and it actually turned out that she was 3 and nobody had ever sat on her before, and yet I got on her, rode her down the road like, she should know what she was doing and all the rest of it. And bless that horse's heart, she did it for 7 days without question. And then suddenly went, okay, I'm done. I just don't get this anymore, and I can't cope. And she turned tail in 3 lanes of traffic, because that's how ignorant and stupid I was, that I was riding her out on in that kind of environment. And she headed back into the oncoming traffic, flew round a corner and chucked me off. And I was like, okay, this isn't what horses are supposed to be about. Like, what happened? And and we just went on this massive journey, and I, to this day, so the centre that I want to, I've got massive dreams of what it is that I want to do, and I want to create a centre called the Silkwood Centre, and she was called Silkwood, and it is all about her. My entire life has been about her, about understanding why these poor animals become so dangerous, become so unruly, become naughty, as we call them, which is completely wrong. And but also that put me on this journey of understanding myself as well. And I think, and like I say, with having been kicked in the face, I just made a decision that I had to go after what I wanted, and what I wanted was to work with horses. And again, very controlling father. The very first job I ever got with horses, he used to be a butcher, and I called in at his shop on the way home from the second day I'd been at this job, and he was like, "What on earth have you been doing?" Because I was filthy, because I cannot stay clean to save my life. And he said, I'm not having any child of mine becoming somebody else's slave. He said, if you want a horse, then you get a decent job so you can afford to buy a horse. You do not become a slave. But now, I had worked so hard to get this job, because it was a really good riding school, and it was in the days of YTS, which you guys wouldn't remember because you're far too young. But to get on these training schemes was really hard, and I'd managed to do it, and I was really proud of myself. And he phoned them up there and then, and he said, I'm just letting you know that she won't be back again, and I'm sending her mother to collect all the stuff. And that was it. My job with horses. And I was like, now, me being me now, I'd have grabbed that phone off him and said, just don't listen to him, he's an idiot. I'd have gone back the next day. But I was so scared of my parents. Really, truly terrified of both of them. I would never, ever go up against them. And so I walked away from horses, and and I didn't have one then. And then they just kept calling me back, and I was like, no, I'm going to follow what I want to do. I am not being told this is what I should do with my life. And I think that was when the separation came. And like I say, my dad moved to Spain when I was 18, I believe, on my 18th birthday or around then. So he distanced himself, and I was like, that's a better place for me, because I'm not constantly living in fear of him coming after me for something or other. And then I left home. So I managed to remove myself from my parents, and it gave me that headspace to be able to discover who I was. And I've always been far too grown up for my age. There's a photograph of me when I was 12, and
it sounds like you got help from the universe a few times.
Oh, absolutely, massively.
can I just pause and say one thing as well? Just to, if this is right, like it sounds like these experiences that you've had in your life when you were 19, with getting kicked in the face with the horse and with the bus situation and Justin, it sounds like those experiences for you, you had contacted death in a way, like that
Definitely.
death, like you were about to potentially die, right? And at the hospital, they like said like you could die, so you got to kind of start doing what you want to do in your life and go after that. It sounds like that had a huge impact on you then taking action towards like changing and understanding yourself and like going like big following the dream with horses, for example. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And it's never stopped. It didn't just become one of those things that you kind of forget about. It structured my life, really. Is that
like struck you to your core? Like
yeah, absolutely. And also it makes you say to yourself, so what do I want out of life? You know, it's like when somebody says something to you like that, where am I going? What am I doing? And it took me a long time, you know, to be strong enough, because I was a. It's really hard to say this because I think over time you forget just how weak you
Yeah,
once were.
you do. It's
You
funny.
do, you know, and I never ever look back on my childhood away from my family thinking that I was a weak person. But whenever I was with them, I was incredibly weak. I would not stand up for myself for anything. You know, my mother was aggressive is the best way to describe her. No, that's being a bit nice. But it was I was just terrified. You know, and only probably about 3 years ago, she said to me, all I remember about meal times when you were a child is you just sitting there in total silence with your head down just eating your food. And that's because there would be a fight at the dinner table every single night between her and my sister. And my life was just terrifying. Home was terrifying, and that's all I remember about it. And I remember from being about 11 years old, I was incredibly lonely as a child. I had like really good friends that I would go out and play with and stuff like that. But I felt as though I was in a place I didn't belong, to be honest, and that I, wasn't wanted as such. But my mother used to call me the angel and my sister the devil. So, what kind of relationship was I ever going to have with my sister when, you're taught the devil is evil, the devil is dangerous, you know?
It's interesting when you say like one thing that I'm thinking about is when you say like that home wasn't safe and
Mm,
your other environments weren't really safe either.
mm,
It's interesting because for when a conscious person comes into the world, and especially the time you were born, but also the times that of me and Jonathan's generation, things are getting a little bit better now in the West. But when you're a conscious person, the world isn't really safe because other people aren't conscious. So they don't understand that if they do physical things to hurt you, if they do psychological things to hurt you, they don't understand that they're hurting you because they're most of the time either that part of them has been numbed or they don't have that part. So for a conscious person, like the home can be unsafe, but schools in Denmark were super unsafe. Like
mm,
even physical violence was very prevalent in like the smaller cities. Um, and the psychological environment was very unsafe. So I
mm,
think one thing, for example, one thing that really defined my childhood was just feeling unsafe, and it took me many years to arrive in a place where I could actually feel safe in myself and among other people and so on. And I think it's a big thing for conscious people because unconscious people are really really unsafe
mm.
because they don't really yet have empathy. They don't really have empathy yet. And when a person doesn't have empathy, they just don't know what they're doing to people who do.
I think it's fair to say actually that I didn't have empathy and wasn't a conscious person either because I was very reactive. I remember all I the role models I had were very unconscious, very aggressive, and when things happened to me that scared me, and to this day, that I will still revert back to that. When fear kicks in, like, the kind of fear that happens instantly, the aggression will show up. That is the first thing that happens to me. And I have to breathe and bring myself back down to who I am to be able to deal with that. So
Who are you, Lorraine?
who am I? That's an interesting question. Who am I? I'm just me.
Well, you said you got to breathe and bring yourself down to who you are.
So me is very conscious of how I behave, how I show up, how I treat other people, how I affect other people. I still have a lot of work to do on that. I genuinely believe that. I am not always the best person that I can be. There are times when something or somebody will trigger me, and I am ashamed to be me. I don't want to be that person that reacts negatively and gets really quite cross. And the me is somebody who has a very, very deep understanding of how we show up in the world and how and also how so when other people do things to me or to others around me, the first thing I will do is then go to, okay, so where is that coming from for them?
Okay.
It's like,
Looking at it. Yeah.
that's not them. That's a reaction. You know what I mean? Because I know them much more deeply than that. And
and you know and you're aware in yourself on that level to see that in the other person that the place they're coming from is a reaction. It's not them on a deeper level. You could say.
Because I think that what we are born with, who we are born as, gets knocked about so badly throughout life. I think if we could all be the 5-year-old kid who believed that anything was possible and that we were happy most of the time, or just blissfully ignorant or whatever, and then actually we would become incredible people if we were allowed to be everything that we are supposed to be. But equally so, it's our life experiences that make us who we are. So I think there has to be a base element, if you get what I mean. It's like the true core of you is maybe how you come into this earth or onto this earth, and then everything else around you it's the layers and layers that are collected, if you like, throughout the years that deepen.
Yeah, like residue almost of the past.
Yeah, and but also like rings of a tree. The rings, the layers of a tree, as the growth rings, give it strength. They give it direction. They give it resilience. And I feel that's what those layers are. Every time somebody throws something at you, it strength. That saying, "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger." I have a
It's
few.
funny because I kind of experienced the opposite of that, actually.
Okay.
There's a famous Batman quote where the Joker says, "Everything that doesn't kill you just makes you stranger," and that's kind of that. I think that's a little more accurate. But I think that usually what usually what I see in people is that the thing is what happened in the past. Usually, for example, if we have a traumatic event with one person, then that can leave a huge impression on us. Now, the problem is what our mind does is it says everyone is like this one person. So if we are mistreated by a male kid, for example, we may, for the rest of our lives, look at men in a certain way through certain emotions, or if it happens through a female kid, or whatever. And so, actually, the things that don't kill us, they really mess us up psychologically. So I
want to know what Jonathan's take is on that. What do you think?
So when you we'll ask him afterwards. So when you describe the rings of the tree as something that makes us grow, I think there's a truth to that, but I also think that we kind of have to process the pain of it to actually grow, so that the wisdom is left, but the pain is gone. Because I see a lot of people who, for me, usually people don't seem to get older because their bodies get old or whatever. They seem to get older because they get layers and layers and layers of these sad ideas of what life is like and people are like, and they get so burdened with all these terrible things that happened. And sometimes when I talk to them, they don't want to let go of it. They don't want to be free. So they just kind of get older and older and older, because psychologically their psyche is filled up with bad things. And in the end, they're just kind of filled with all these bad things that happened, and they can't really see the sky anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the rings of the tree, I think there's truth to that, but I also think it has to be purified, because otherwise we drag the past around like a huge cart full of crap that can weigh us down so much, and it can really, really hinder our lives, because we use so much energy just going forward with this cart can take so much of our energy and mood. But yeah, Jonathan, what is your perspective on all this?
Does it kill you, or does it make you stranger? I love that expression.
What is my take?
What's it like for you? Yeah, the past's
so
pain.
does it make you stronger, or does it make you stranger? You see, I think the stranger is an interesting thing, because that you then have to define what is strange.
Not good.
Yeah, I can see the tree metaphor, and yeah, I'm a visual person, so that's easy to see that. I kind of see it as like, yeah, you're born with this pureness, I guess, or this pure nature of you as a human being without any layers, really. I mean, or any fears or any reactions, more or less. And yeah, I can see the like then we get layers, and that can be a way of strengthening us. Uh, then there's this other part of me that's like, well, we get all these layers or masks. I like the word of using masks, right? And the masks make it harder to see, right? Because the more masks we put on, the harder it is to get into this pure, true nature, this pure, true self that you talk of, like the core you. Because there is all these layers, all these masks that are put on from our childhood or from different things that we construct, and then we see our reality through this. And so my take on it is actually that we get to a point where we start to go, okay, I've got these layers. Can I now kind of start to become aware of them, and can I go go more deeper into ourselves to let this true nature, this pure self that's there within you, within all of us all along, to breathe and to see the world through that lens. And that's how I see that as like so it's like kind of growing and then going back inside you, and then coming from that place. And yeah, that's my take.
I think the analogy of the mask is actually possibly a different thing. That yes, it's definitely part of that's what happens to you as you build and grow. But I think that's more the protective layers. You say I say this because I'm not very good at the mask. I've always been fairly outspoken, I guess. Not not in a necessarily rude way, but as in a very little filter way, which used to get me in trouble all the time as a kid. But I didn't really understand the point, or maybe just didn't even find it possible to be and think anything that I was supposed to think. You know what I mean? It's like it didn't make sense to me, and I think that was possibly to do with my mother. To be fair, because she still is very much like that. She doesn't do anything that she's supposed to do. You know what I mean? She's so for example, when me and my sister had boyfriends when we were teenagers, she was like, and what mother would say this to their child? Don't get stuck with one bloke at that age. You just want to go and like, you know, play the field and find out what it's like to be with different men and stuff. And I was like, I was 15 when she first said that to me. In fact,
Which isn't really a bad advice normally, but your mother was doing it in a bad way in her
yeah,
marriage, right?
because her, you know, I mean, the guy that I was with was lovely, and my sister has actually ended up marrying the guy that she was with because my mother broke both of us up. You know, it's like she wouldn't let me be with the guy I was with, and you know, she made it really difficult for my sister to be with her bloke as well. So, but that was exactly her. That was the way she lived her life. She went from one affair to the next, you know, and she was basically teaching us to do the same. And so that you know, putting on that mask, I suppose, and to this day I hate false people, and I can see right through them.
Lorraine, there's one thing I want to circle back to, which is a connection I find interesting. And I want your input on. So we talked about how we believe we choose our parents and
Mm-hmm.
maybe major life events and stuff like that. And I like that idea as well. I don't know if it's true, but it's probably true. And then we talked about that there's a need to get away from certain family members, from certain people, because their presence is overwhelming in a negative way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's an interesting point here, because I think to walk the conscious path, sometimes you have to recognize that you need some distance from things that trigger you so that you can actually have the time and space to become more conscious and not being triggered all the time.
Mm-hmm.
However, the interesting thing is often as we grow in consciousness, we then in through some people or through some events, we end up going back in those situations that trigger us in some kind of way, because usually there's something in that situation. For example, if we may not go back to our parents, but maybe we go back to someone that reminds us of them, because there were actually qualities in our parents that we did like, and it may be in our interest to release some of that trauma that we had because of them.
Mm.
So, you know, in every old story, the wise man goes away from or even the hero goes out from the ordinary, goes into the extraordinary, and then comes back to the ordinary to teach what they have learned. Right? The wise man goes to the mountain and comes back to teach wisdom. So, what I want to ask you about is something, I don't have the answer to this, but it's something I find interesting. Do you think that part of the path is, you know, you get some distance from these people, then you become more and more conscious, and then maybe one day you go back, in a sense, both to maybe purify yourself, or maybe just to give them some of that consciousness that you now have, and because now your consciousness is no longer going to be overwhelmed by their presence in your life, like a sort
So,
of out and back again. What do you think?
so the reason that's making me laugh is because
Because we chose
so
them ourselves, right? That's the thing.
yes, yeah, and so not long after I no actually yeah, not long after I chose to remove my parents from my life, I very much invited somebody into my life who I knew this guy as a child. He is my lodger. Um, we connected again probably 8 or 9 years ago, and the same affinity was still there and stuff like that. And this, what I was talking about earlier, about how you know somebody from the core of you. Sorry, from the core of who they were when they were a kid. I think he was probably about 17 when I last saw him, until 30 odd years later or whatever. He had become the biggest narcissist I have ever met in my life. Right now, that is what my parents are. No, I never realised, because he was so angry, and he was so, the world was had done all kinds of things to him, and very immature in his outlook, just basically mad with the world. But I knew who he was, so I chose to keep, giving him chances. And
The devil, you know.
well, one of the reasons that this happened as well is because when my horse broke my jaw, it was his relations yard that we were on, and he was the only person that would look after my horse for me. And it was him that I actually owe my life to horses with, because when I came out of hospital, I could not get anywhere near this horse. And it was him who said to me, "It's okay, I'll just walk around the yard with you. We'll get your confidence back." Within a couple of weeks, I was back riding her. If he hadn't have done that, I do not know what I'd have done. I could not walk within 2 inches of this horse without having an absolute meltdown. So in my head, I owed him big time, because my life has been entirely about horses. So of course, when I could see all this trauma in him and all this anger, and I really, really felt I could help him and wanted to. So, however, I discovered, and this happened to me with my husband as well, is that having been brought up by people who convince you that everything that they say is true and you do not question it, that can happen to me over and over again. And that is exactly what Simon did to me. He convinced me that he lived back up in Derbyshire, moved down here to Cornwall with me. And because he is an amazing horseman, and I always knew he was, but it was so that he could be with the horses. And he convinced me that it would be the best thing ever, that he was going to do all these things, he was going to change everything in my life, or all this kind of thing. Familiar story, because that's exactly what my husband told me, and I believed it. and then once he'd moved down here, it turned out to be almost the opposite. He treated me so badly, it was horrendous. And I remember saying to one of my friends, I should just ask him to move out, but I know that he's been sent here to teach me how to deal with narcissists. And she said to me, "There's only one way to deal with narcissists, and that's to get them out of your life." And I said, I'm sorry, I don't agree. I said, because he wasn't like that when he was a kid. Life has made him like, he was the kindest, caring, most caring, sweetest lad. He was lovely. And I said, it's life that does this to people. And I think that he is worth spending the time with. And lo and behold, we've had some tough times. We've had discussions, arguments. I've come close to kicking him out a few times when I just couldn't hack it any longer. But oh my God, has he taught me? Because
what has he taught you?
He's taught me how to deal with a narcissist. He's taught me how to deal with people who are going to just use you and take from you and refuse to give. And he's taught me how to help people like that. Because he has changed. There's no two ways about it. He's now kind, caring. He bought his own horse in November. She has been the making of him. And one of the conversations we have frequently is, why can't you treat women the way you treat that horse? Because she is a female horse. And every time I say it to him, I know it's cut into the core, but the look on his face, the disrespect he has for women, is horrendous, and you can see it all over his face. And every time I say to him, if you treated women the way you treated that horse, they will be falling at your feet. And it makes him feel physically sick. You can see it on his face, to think that he would lower himself to treat a woman that way. Because, well, I know what happened to him. Basically, his mother abandoned him, and he's never got over it.
I think you're bringing up some really interesting things here, and the first thing I'm thinking of is something that can be hard to stomach is that people aren't all bad.
No,
and
absolutely.
it doesn't matter who they are, what they've done to people.
Mm-hmm.
No one is just all bad. Like, you might want to hate someone, you might have a good reason to, but that person is going to be good for someone or to something. And that can be difficult sometimes.
But
to
I think this is why it's worth spending the time. It's worth, and this is one of my reasons for because you're a therapist as well, aren't you, Jonathan? Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because one of the reasons that I've never gone down the therapy route is because even though I know that I can help people and I can help people through horses more specifically, um, it takes time, and it
Yeah.
doesn't take time that you can clock up and say, pay me this much. Because for me, I don't think any amount of money would ever make me want to help people in that way.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, I need money to be able to survive. I need money to be able to feed everything. I have 10 horses and 5 dogs who are relying on me. You know, that's what I need money for. Anything else, I was put on this earth to help people, to help horses, to help people. And however it is that I show up to do that, I can't I can't put the two things together. I can't put money and helping somebody in the same box in
Hmm.
terms of therapy. I can help people by providing a space for them to be in, which is what me and Torbjorn talked about.
Is that what you do, Lorraine? Because I'm
Yeah.
unfamiliar with
So
what. I'm trying
so
to get an
so
idea of what it is that you do. So you give space and people stay with you and you kind of help them in their path.
so so my my way of helping people is very inadvertently. So I do equine facilitated learning, which is basically where you introduce people to horses and they discover something about themselves, is the easiest way to describe that part of what I do. But my main business is I run camps for people with their own horses. And they come along with their horse expecting to, they're just going to learn about a bit more about their horse or about, how to ride their horse better. Over the 9 years we've been doing it, what they've actually learned is who they are as people, who they are as in relation to their horses, how to connect with people who are on the same level. I mean, the friendships that have been formed within these camps that have then helped them to grow is, they're just phenomenal. And it's just and they talk on a different level because when we go to camp, it's like our own little world. Nobody can touch us, kind of thing. And and everybody's very so we have a very strict rule of no judgment at camp. So I don't care where anybody's at on their journey of horsemanship. It's irrelevant. Nobody's allowed to say anything bad about anybody else because the horse world is very, very bitchy. So we created this safe space for a start. And then we help them to, so our instructors are very carefully chosen as well because they teach our riders about the relationship with them and the horse. It's not about the sport. It's not about how high you can jump, how fast you can go. It's about how can we do this in a way that your horse will respond to best. Now that is the power of horses because if you can learn to do that with a horse because they're non-verbal, you can do that with any human being, and that's what happens. It changes their relationships and it's this connection. I mean, the people that I've connected with through camp and also through my lessons. I'm a riding instructor as well. I can see their lives changing before them. I can see their relationships changing before them, and it is because of this space that just creates um it's a place to grow. It's not a place to reflect on, oh my god, my life is so bad. It's not about therapy, it's about where you go after therapy. It's about, this is the person I can be when I'm at my best, not the person who feels really bad about myself because of all the shit that's happened to me in the past. And
one
that
thing
that is
one
me
thing I
all
was
over.
talking to Jonathan about was that we actually could that we were going to talk to you about these camps because they could give us a lot of inspiration to what we want to do, which
I
is
agree.
do the same kind of camps but with people.
Hmm.
And we're coming up on the end of the first episode here. We've almost done an hour, but I think we're gonna have to do one more. and then we can sort of go into the process on the camps and all this stuff. But I think we're gonna have to cut it here for the first episode. Does anyone have anything?
So is this like part 1 or 2 or something?
I think it will have to
Or
be,
3
because
or 4 or who knows.
I definitely want to go into this camp thing, and we just open up that, but we don't have time for it now. So we're just gonna kind of fade this out. Is there anything that anyone has anything closing to say? Then we'll say that, and then we'll stop here for part 1.
I'm just very curious to know about these camps now. So, if you're listening into this this far in the episode, then keep listening to the next to see about to hear about the camps. And it sounds like a truly powerful and moving thing for the people that come to these camps for you, and like what changes or shifts in their life, the growth and the So thanks for coming on board, Lorraine, and sharing your story, sharing your a piece of your life with us, and all the people listening in today. It's been
no, it's a pleasure, and thank you for asking me, actually, because this is something that a few months back a friend of mine said you need to find your voice. You need to find a platform for your voice, because the stuff that you talk about is the stuff that changes people. And I don't mean that to sound egotistical, but I've got so much evidence that is possible.
Yeah.
That I guess it must be true. So thank you.
And we're about to get into that in the next episode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. So thank you a lot, Lorraine, and we will be right back.